Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life podcast. I hope everybody is having a beautiful day. I hope that the sun is shining. I hope that the birds are singing. I hope the wind is at your back. I hope you are ready and in tune for a show that will put you on the right path. I want everyone to meet Daniela Bumann, a Swiss born visionary and transformative guide, bridging the serene mountains of Switzerland with California's innovative pulse. Danielle is not just a corporate consultant or speaker. She's a force of nature, blending the ancient wisdom of dolphin consciousness with cutting edge insights in psychology and spiritual growth. Her teachings lead us into deep, uncharted waters where personal transformation meets collective evolution, inviting us to release outdated paradigms and embody a life of unity and vibrant presence. In her latest work, Gliding You Home, A Dolphin's Dream of a New Earth, Daniela unveils a path to reconnect with our spiritual essence, break free from generational patterns, and embrace life in a profound state of flow. Drawing from her own journey through burnout and rebirth, she now guides high performers to reclaim their vitality through the Vibrant Living Performance Triad, which she integrates 7 powerful habits for holistic success. Witnessing Daniela on stage is like encountering a primal force. She speaks to our deepest potential and passion, intelligence, and a touch of magic, awakening a longing for unity and growth. Her presence is a journey, a call to dive into the mysteries of the self and the dream of new earth. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Daniela. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
I love to be on this show. Thank you so much, George. It's such a pleasure to be here today and share with you and your audience.
Well, thank you very much. Before we got started, you and I were just talking about the different energies that are out there. You had recently done a retreat in California. We both talked about Hawaii and Northern California and Southern California and the different energies out there. What maybe as that is a segue, was it these different energies? What was it that drove you to work on this latest project?
Well, I've always somewhat been an explorer of spirituality and the mind. You know, my mind is just eternally curious. Even if the person is very different than I am, I'm always like, what makes you think that way? You know,
Yeah.
most people don't care, and I do, which is why I'm a coach. You know, also, but in the consciousness exploration that I've been in, having grown up in Switzerland, George,
Mm-hmm.
and so having been very much a nature child and in touch with nature and its energy, its pulse, its heavy storms and thunders and everything. I had left Switzerland many years ago, and I started to, as soon as I stepped foot onto American ground, and it's not about it being perfect or Switzerland being perfect, by the way, but it was just a different energy. So it kind of led me on this journey to continue to dive deeper into my own consciousness and responsiveness or reactiveness and studying people and personalities. Or in Switzerland that was funny. Here, when I first got here, I didn't speak the language and nobody laughed at my jokes.
No.
I'm like, what is this? We can't have this. So it led me on this journey go to dive deeper into studying consciousness, human consciousness. And as I was pushing the river, so to speak, and I was burning the candle at both ends, uh, having experienced quite a bit of nerve pain, I kind of reached my limit. Because I was going back and forth to Europe, doing work in Europe, teaching in Europe, and also being a case manager of my parents when they were
Yeah.
elderly and stayed at home. So I really kind of thought, hey, I could just do it all. you know?
Yep.
The hero that ended up finding her limits. But to make a long story short, there was a phase where it was very challenging for me to deal with the amount of nerve pain I experienced internally and externally. And I was sitting on the couch and I just surrendered and let go of the resistance I was feeling. I just had it. So I just let go and I found myself swept up into this in this different stream of consciousness. And it was just the way it always had, the way I always imagined it to be. So the dolphins made themselves known, and they never left me since. Been pushing me to share information and really talking about the joy flow, and how the paradigms are changing, and the old is no longer working personally, professionally, on planet Earth, period, and to move much more into a flow state and a function and live and work from a joy flow state.
Yeah, it's interesting to tap in to the language of the planet, be it the frequency of the dolphins or be it the sound of the wind moving through the trees. It's interesting. All the metaphors you've been using are about water, like diving deep and pushing the river. And was that what is your connection to the ocean? Like, how do you think that it was the dolphins that contacted you?
Well, in some ways, I really think it had very little to do with, it may sound like a contradiction, but it isn't. It really had actually very little to do with, I happen to be a water sign,
Hmm.
on that level, but it had little to do with the ocean. It was more the frequency.
Yeah.
It was more the frequency. Even people are saying, have you swam with dolphins yet? And I'm like, no, I have not. And it's funny, even though, and also I don't really have a desire to swim with them because they're in my ear all the time. I'm
Right.
trying to, okay, can you give me a break for a minute? you know, I'm being a little facetious now, but so it was more an energetic connection. Being someone, like I said, I've always been very enthusiastic about life and the colors and the trees, and it's very sensory perceptive. And the part of the message, like you and I were just talking about earlier, George, is in as the human starts to tap into its sensory perceptiveness in the ocean, it is almost like a tank, like a
Yeah.
sensory deprivation tank, because now we dive into the underworld, we dive into beyond the humanness that we were taught that we are, and we can step and expand our awareness into a different realms. And of course the dolphins kind of move right in there. They're like, yes, that's where we can start to pick up and, in quotation, save humanity as we are reconnecting with that kind of consciousness and interconnectedness. And it was very funny at the very beginning as I was starting to do the channel their work. One sentence that kept on swimming around constantly was interconnected, interwoven, interdependent communication. Now, this was way at the beginning of the book. I didn't know what they were going to all talk about, because it's their book. So it was very interesting. And so, again, communication, frequency, energy, and being a flower of energy, flowing. So they needed a medium that flows.
Yeah. Have you looked at a lot of a lot of this sounds like John Lilly, back in the day in the 60s, he was doing these incredible experiments with dolphins and psychedelics and being able to communicate on a level that's interspecies. Have you looked at some of his work? Are you familiar with that?
I've looked at some of his work, yeah, the neuroscientific,
Yeah.
components and all of that. Yes, he was definitely guided. It's a little hard for me when I see some of the conditions before they were improved because I'm very sensitive to,
Yeah.
you know, you know what I'm saying. I have
Yeah.
I'm a big PETA advocate, and I sign a lot of petitions. It's a little hard for me that part. I'll be really honest with you, but yes, it definitely. I think he was guided, and he tapped into something there, that, yes, very very similar in that way that it was what did you just call it?
Like an interspecies communication.
Yes, and that's definitely what their message is. There is a part, they're just guiding me to the book right now. Do you mind if I read just a tatty of the
Yeah, please. I would love it.
So anyway, this is the book. An artist friend of mine drew this, and there's beautiful drawings inside the book also. But this part here, embodying being and acting as your authentic soul self, mission into action. So, in reference to what we just talked about, the dolphin consciousness has held the wisdom of the ages together with the whale whisperers, revealing more of its joy, lightness, depth, and knowing of an easier, interwoven way of evolution, co creating and coexisting, including a well adept timeline. As consciousness leaders and master multisensory and multidimensional communicators, we are sonar echoing and piloting the way. Our grace of holding space for transformation has been held with much love over eons of time.
I love it. It's a beautiful message. I think it definitely speaks to the evolution of language on some level. It seems that while our power of language is quite possibly one of our greatest gifts, it does seem sometimes that the majority of people are talking past each other. It does seem that we're like
Yes.
Shakespeare's Act 5, Scene 5, a tale full of sound and fury, completely devoid of any meaning.
Yes, yes. And I think now that you say that, it reminds me that I love that. That's a great example, George. In the early, I think it was 2006 or so, I started to deeply dive into studying personality and communication styles.
Nice.
And it was just fascinating to me. And to also, how do you improve the different communication styles? And how did they come across? How did they relate? How did it come across in conflict? And
Yeah.
so when I'm thinking back, I'm like, oh, well, they had it all lined up for me. This was in 2006 or so. I would teach communication and team building seminars. And one of the lines I used to use was, have you ever noticed that there's a lot of words going back and forth and there's really no communication going on?
Yeah.
you know so that's kind of to what you're saying. So there's a section in the book, I don't remember where it is, but they do talk about the part that words are really not that important. Words, that the way we emit who we are. Of course, we need to use words on planet Earth, but we use too many words oftentimes, unless they're in the flow and they bubble up and out. Again, that's different than just, the words we often use. This kind of reminds me of an example. I had a very close connection with my dad. He was the first love of my life, and somehow he seems to show up
Yeah.
all the time.
Nice.
He's no longer with us, but he still is. And I remember him, George, having been in my youth, having been somebody that was just very energetic and enthusiastic. And oftentimes he would say to me, "Just listen to what the other person is saying. Let's pay attention to listen." So to create that space, you know? And as we create that space speaks so much more. And I think the ocean gives us that space.
Yeah, I would agree. In before we started going live, I was mentioning to you that when I lived in Hawaii, my family and I would go to Waimea as much as we could on the weekends, and you dive down and you're completely submersed in what is similar to an isolation tank because, like you had mentioned, all the distractions are gone. You can hear the dolphins. You can see the way in which the sea life is moving in schools beneath you. You can see the colors flashing. You can see the way that the sun reflects off the top of the water, and it's alien in so many ways. And so is the languages that we hear. It doesn't mean we can't on some level begin to understand their tones, their frequencies, or their meaning, but it is alien in the beginning. Is that how it sounded to you when you first began getting like these transmissions?
No, to me, it was like where I came from.
Mm.
So when I slipped literally, because I currently have an elderly friend that's actually, she's in the process of going to the other side now.
Hmm.
And when I was first experiencing all these symptoms, then I kind of just slipped and, let go of resistance. And I had spoken to her about that. I said, it's okay for you, the lady that's in the middle of transitioning now. I said, it's okay to just let go and just let that light guide you and take you. Because when the spirit surrenders to the process, the body will just let go. That's just the bottom line. It will just like, because the ego self has to be it down here in the veil under, the veil is not lifted yet. And so when I surrendered to this process, I just let go. I slipped to the other side, so to speak. But
Yeah.
for me, it was very much towards like when I came back, it was very challenging for about a year or so because I was afraid of closing my eyes for the fear that I was going to slip to the other side. I was kind of going back and forth all the time. And then of course I was suddenly in this reality again, and it was so less vibrant than I ever imagined it to be before I slipped to the other side. And that was very spooky to me because I've always been somebody that has loved life, and now suddenly I'm back here and things feel dull. But I'm here. I live here. So it took me about a year to integrate that. And that's where a lot of that information that they passed on just kind of flew through me, literally. I just had to really step out and they swam in, and then there it went. It's actually quite an effortless process. They pretty much gave me even the topics to talk about, the outline. They pretty much, they have a lot to say.
And maybe this is a good point to jump into some of their messaging, like the book "Gliding Us Home: A New Earth." Like, what are they talking about? Are we in a time of transition, or what are some of the messages that I don't want to give away too much of the book? I want people to go out and buy it and check it out
Right.
because it's worth reading and it's worth getting the deep insights. But maybe you can give us some of the surface level ideas of what these messages are and what's on the horizon.
Sure. So part of what I'm just going to open this up
Yeah,
here
please.
to the index actually.
Okay.
But the part of what I just talked about was really about slipping into a dolphin stream, is slipping to the other side. That's really what I did.
Yeah.
And then that's where this first initial poem, because it's written in a very poetic way, in a very flowing way. And even I actually recorded the audio because they really want me to record the
Yeah.
audio. And it was a bit challenging to record it because they don't really, I mean, there's periods and commas in the book, but the way they function, they don't have a stopping point. They eternally flow. So it's a little challenging to actually record it, but it turned out very well, from what I've heard. So what they talk about is the evolution of humanity. Where have we been? Where are we at now, and what is the potential of where we can go? And for that, they're encouraging us, George, to enter the stream, to enter that stream of consciousness in
Love
order
it.
for us to heal the disconnection where we became over identified in who we are in our human vehicle. Now, we're not trying to disown that we're human, but that part really talks about healing the disconnection. Then they also talk about living in the now. What does that look like? living in the now versus constantly being preoccupied with the future or the past, right? They talk about the secret chambers of your being. What are they? The secret chambers of your being. What does that mean to the listener? If you close your eyes and you meditate over that, I bet you're going to get an answer of what that means, right? Like just like with my dad, where he was taking us into the forest, and we were the four of us kids, and he would uh, yield and halt us to just listen to the noise of the forest, to the sounds of the forest, to right, kind of like my beginning stages of tapping into the power of being first, and then being a human doing. So we're not a human doing, we're obviously a human being. So they talk about the no concepts but intention. And since they are the dolphin consciousness, they talk a lot about, and this is very apropos for humanity and easy to understand, I think, for most, the emotion is as messenger, dash motion is messengers, right? And of course the dolphins are, they're eternal flowers of energy, and they constantly up level and switch, and they also exist outside of karma and time. So for those people that are able to tap back into this information and open up a small or a large window, those people can start to realize that as you up level your consciousness and you step out of over identification with the material world, that the karma won't repeat itself. Karma has been an eternal infinity. And now the way they work is that it is time to step out of that karmic wheel, to break that karmic wheel, to step out of that infinity. So, there's topics such as from deep compassion and surrender, because as we are starting to, for those of us who are really starting to dive into this, it's like, whoa, this is really rich. I mean, some of the recognitions, they're not for the faint of heart, and then the quickened energetic vibrations that are coming up, the new energy frequencies that are trying to move through us, that requires a lot of compassion and surrender for our own self and also others that are going through that, you know
Yeah, it's interesting to think about our concept of time. Like if you are in the moment, if you're in the stream of consciousness, there really is no past or present. When we look at the Buddhist traditions or even a lot of Eastern philosophy or even Eckhart Tolle, like the power of
Mhm.
now, right? Like that's all there really is. It's so hard for our monkey minds though to grasp onto that. Like, wait a minute, what's gonna happen in the future? Remember what happened yesterday? Remember when that person did that thing to you? Like, it's so hard to be in that flow. It's slippery. It's wonderful when you're there, but it's
Yes,
slippery.
it's slippery. And so, in parts of the way they wrote the book, I'm really glad you brought that up, is the way the book was written through them is, as people are actually reading through the pages, and I have had this confirmed by quite a few people, it allows you to energetically actually adjust. You see? So they're not talking about this heavy loaded, shift, but they're talking about, as you start to, the
Right.
more you tap into that consciousness, and as you were reading, it's just a little part I read to you, it has a
Yeah.
very flowing, fluid motion, Um, so that leads me to the part in the book that talks about losing your mind, because there were parts where I'm like, oh, I'm losing my mind here, like this and this and this, and what I thought was true, I just didn't see it anymore. It was like it was starting to be washed away. You know how kids build these sand castles, you know?
Yep.
They're gorgeous. Sometimes adults are really good at doing that.
Yeah.
These, and then suddenly, woo, and so that's what they're imagining, but it is definitely a pivot. It's where the upper half above the belly button and the lower half below the belly button, if you imagine the infinity symbol like this, right? And then you imagine the infinity symbol around the head down to the feet. And so that's what they're encouraging us to do, is to get into that center point and to start flowing whatever your life may be into that synchronicity of the up and the sides. Now, example would be in the way I started to. I've always been somewhat of a flower and pretty intuitive, but the way I started to feel the shift was in my coaching sessions, being quite left-brained and
Mhm.
also being quite right-brained. But I started to see that when I had certain things planned for an individual I was working with, because I do corporate coaching and also do spiritual coaching, I do a variety of kinds. And I started to realize that many times those things I'd planned ahead, forget it. It wasn't happening because I tapped, just like you and I, George. When we first start talking, right? And we're both saying, we
Yeah.
wish it's already recorded, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the stream. That is the stream. That is where at the end of the session you're like, oh wow, this is so exciting. And the client is, this is so exciting. I never realized this, because it is in the stream. Both are in the stream. I'm in the stream, he's in the stream.
Yeah. It's
Yeah. It's
sometimes I wonder if what we're seeing in this shift of consciousness is it seems to me to be an evolution of consciousness, a sort of the next step in what is possible, not only in communication, but in living a life worth living. And so this might be unpopular, but in some ways I see it's going to take the death of the last generation in order for us to fully step through this thing. And maybe that's what always happens, and maybe death is the wrong word. Maybe it's the next generation moving into a higher level, or whatever happens at the end of the mortality experience. But so much of what seems to be happening today seems to be the holding on, the failure to surrender to what's coming next, not only with the older class, but all of us. Like, I feel like all of us as a species are trying to be shown this lesson of surrender. Like, you can't control it. You have to
yes.
let go. You have to surrender. I feel like that message is coming through in almost everybody that I'm talking to. What do you think about that?
Yes, I think that deep compassion and surrender. You mind if I read just a little bit out of that
Yeah,
here?
please. Please.
So this is the chapter, Deep Compassion and Surrender, the Power of Vulnerability to Sense, Trans-Form, Ascend, and Perceive All You Have Ever Been. 1. As you are shifting and diving into what may feel like an ocean, a deep, never-ending and everlasting breath. If you think about it, of surrender, falling into the midst of your own overshadowed vulnerability of judgment, perception, to dissolve old ways of
Mm.
being and patterning your life. Something starts to happen, and it creates a new dimension that opens right inside of your being. You're right on track there. To a certain degree, perhaps, it's like if you were to open a door to a cabin hideout that had been forgotten, sitting in the shadow of a mountain, subconsciously protected and overgrown by bushes and weeds, having created their own life force. Yet, just as soon as the fresh air and the slightest glimmer of sunlight flood, they illuminate the beauty and the space within, despite the dust, forlorn dreams, and perhaps the musky scent lingering, but readily cleared by the new inflow of newly refreshed air, sunshine, and light.
You are a beautiful writer. That is, it's contagious. It's attractive. You know, it's permeating. It's sort of like diving into the water itself when I hear you read it. Thanks for that. It's
Oh, you're welcome. Remember at the very beginning, I appreciate you so much, George, because I feel like we're really in sync here.
yeah,
But that's remember at the beginning I was sharing with you, they just sort of
yeah.
they're so immersive. You know, it was like I really felt like I was so losing myself in this whole, you know, like yeah, I'm there, but they're just so immersive in the experience. Like, you know, and it just all, you know, pretty much flows, you know. This crack creates just enough of an open space to allow your courage to move more fluently into the authenticity of past and new vulnerable emotions. And newly found strength starts to orchestrate and acts like a lubricant of sorts, moving gently and slowly while gaining momentum as you adapt to its course and chorus throughout the rest of your being. And on it goes.
It's wonderful. We got our first question coming in here. Excuse me. It says coming in from this is coming from Chase Hatton in Arizona. He says, "What do you see as the essential bridge between ancient wisdom and modern psychology in your teachings?"
The ancient bridge. The ancient bridge. The ancient bridge is the one bridge really that has never left, that has always kept together, you know, the teachings. Just like I was reading
Right?
earlier, you know, the dolphins holding the wisdom of the
Yeah.
ages.
Yeah.
So the bridge in parts really is for the human to continue to learn to balance the left and the right hemisphere, because as you
Mm.
do, it's going to allow you to tap deeper and deeper into the center point of your being. Like remember I was saying earlier, the infinity of the human this way, and then, you know, around the waist this way. And that's going to really help the human to start to ground that. So that is really the bridge, but the balancing of the left and right hemisphere. And that is what I see with my corporate clients that are
Yeah.
very brained. Also, as I start to work with them as a tool, I use a lot of mindfulness and presence, but as I start to work with them as a tool with balancing the left and the right hemisphere, then they start to go, oh, now I get it. I was just writing this contract, but I realized, or this proposal for a client, but I realized I was doing it just from the brain alone. I wasn't balancing the ancient wisdom and today's psychology, right? So there is no distance between those two. In truth, it's just how it's being now taught and brought forward. So hence calling this style of working a very holistically oriented style of unifying teachings.
I love it. It sounds like what the neuroscientists would call the corpus callosum and the exchange of information from the right to the left hemisphere. Or Ian McGilchrist has written a series of great books, the first of which was called The Master and His Emissary. And the second is like this 2-volume tome called The Matter with Things. But he speaks in these brilliant metaphors, and he speaks in a way that speaks to the right brain. And he talks about big ideas and understanding and concepts and, you know, these giant ways of modes of thinking. And it sounds to me that that's from what you've read in these excerpts so far, it seems that the dolphins are speaking in that same frequency, that same language of the right hemisphere that helps us understand the big picture, that's meaningful on some level. Does that
Yes.
seem accurate?
Yes, and actually, I'm glad you said that. That reminds me of an example of a friend of mine. I was talking to her about that, and she has studied human consciousness and different spiritual teachers for many, many years. And we were having a conversation, and I said to her, this is beyond the knowledge that
Yeah.
some of the teachers you have studied may have taught you. This is not that. It is about the willingness and courage to dive deep into your own ocean. And in that ocean, you are going to be met with the vulnerability of who you are as a human. And those emotions need to come to the forefront in order to find unification. Because she was trying to compare it with, right? But this is not about comparing with, because the dolphins, what their message is in part is you're still going to have your own human experience. And that's okay. Each individual on listening to the show right now, that's okay. As long as you dive into your ocean and you start to play with that consciousness, just like a ball. If you see two dolphins, they're maybe throwing, or
Yeah.
kids, they're throwing a ball back and forth, you start to play within your own ocean, within your consciousness, back and forth. But I think back to Chase, thank you for that question. The one of the key ways of working with that is really different modalities that help to balance that left and the right brain. Like I was saying earlier, here I have it laid out. This is the goal we're working with. And because I'm quite directive in that way, I'm very logical when it comes to that. But then, of course, there's my right side, which is super creative.
Right.
So I had to really kind of like make way. Like, what are you talking about? What am I doing now? Well, now what? This is completely out of the picture now. But that's good. So again, that's the courage to follow that. And then, of course, seeing the response of those I'm teaching. Oh, wow, I didn't ever thought of it that way. That's much more valuable than any handout or other exercise I can give. Like Plato says, I cannot teach anyone anything. I can only make them think.
Yeah. Yeah. There was another great quote I heard recently. I think it was Ram Dass who said, "I'm not going to teach you anything new. The perplexing problem is that I'm going to teach you something you already know. You just don't know that you know it." You know what I mean? But I want to talk about courage for a minute, because
Yes.
I think a lot of people I know have found themselves in this position in life where they're no longer satisfied. They're no longer happy. Like they
Yeah.
have become sort of a carcass of themselves, and they can feel like the life is missing out of them, and they want to do something about it. And they're guided to, their voice is beginning to sound to them. Their ears are ringing. They're feeling it, but they don't quite have the courage to listen to that little voice inside of them. Can you help me understand what might be a catalyst for change? What might amplify that voice? What might help someone take that first step to gain that courage,
Yes.
the momentum to courage?
Well, I think first of all, it's really good to remember that we are all in this together.
Yeah.
You are not alone. If you're listening right now, him or her, you are not alone. And secondly, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you as you are going through this phase of discombobulation. It is just as it's meant to be. When you though start to realize that you're not meant to control it, that's when the momentum of your own new creations or life direction or switching jobs or careers or staying in a relationship or leaving, or what the courage to be you starts to happen. But when the ego mind stays in that phase of wanting to control it, right, that is what locks it in, like just a gear. You can't move it anymore, and then you're frustrated looking around in a state of discombobulation. And so letting go of your own inner control and giving yourself some creative freedom to play with it. Let's just say that, to play with it, play with the different options, to imagine yourself in the different, what would that look like? What would that feel like? What would that, right? And again, the deep compassion and surrender, extending that to yourself as to others, because there's many going through that right now, and that's part of the old paradigm just falling apart, because it is about elevating of consciousness. Like I tell my clients, I say, I have all sorts of handouts and exercises that we could do, but there's nothing is when you start to understand from my first book, High Performance Without Pain, habit one. When you start to understand habit one, which is presence, which reduces anxiety, pain, and chaos, you start to understand what presence is about. Then everything else becomes easier, because then you're allowing your own evolution to move you forward one moment at a time. Not like next year, or I don't know that this is a good time to make a 3-year plan. Yeah. May I just read a little part here out of
Yeah, I would love it, please.
The courage to be, with the discombobulation, confusion, and at times disorientation and frenetic rambling, appearing to make a mess of your life, yet asking, nearly begging, to be shifted at your heart and soul level, but trying to distract you back into submission, programming, and habitual norm and behavior. Your attempts will be nearly futile to use data and information of what you thought you knew and was true, but not original thought, however, nor to independently liberated thinking that had entrenched you into living out of sync with your predominant state of being, prior energetic writing and corruption. Perhaps like trying to connect and charge a battery, yet with wrong polarities in its place. And then on it goes.
It's interesting you use the metaphor of a battery and us drawing on each other in ways. Like if we need each other, if we need the relationships of our community in order for us all to thrive, and yet each individual is desperately trying to compete at a level that only benefits them. Like there's no way that battery is going to light all of us up. It's just like everybody's pulling in a different direction. It's kind of funny when you think about it. Like, what are you doing? What are you guys doing? What are we doing here? Let's figure this out.
Right, exactly. So that's why when you are going back to your own authentic self, your original original thought, then that's when you can start to connect.
Yeah.
Right? That's when you can, because of course, dolphin consciousness is about unity consciousness. So then you can start to reconnect. But before you've done that reconnection between your own batteries, between your left and your right, it's going to be hard to connect. But that phase of the discombobulation, whoever is experiencing that, is a must. It's just part of what is going to happen when they have the courage to stay with it, to see what it's going to personally reveal for you. And then you can start to take action. But oftentimes, the human puts, the cart before the horse.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, to be able to be willing to be with the discombobulation, to see what it's going to reveal.
Yeah. I think on some level it speaks to the heart of education. For so long we have decided that you got to go into this sort of, you sort of become indoctrinated at a young age to believe these things called history, or these lies that we've agreed upon. And you go so deep into this platonic cave, when maybe the best thing you can do is study a battered coastline or sit at a waterfall. Like you might learn more sitting at a battered coastline or swimming in the ocean than you can in a year of school. Like there's a lot you can really learn if you tap into what's happening and begin to understand the relationships of the ecology and how that pertains to your life. Like, do you see this sort of this change that's coming is going to be a profound change in education as well?
I definitely think there's going to be some people that are going to pull for a much more holistic education, where things like art and music
Yeah.
and movement are going to be brought back in. Because, of course, you take those components away, you take the human away from sensory perception. And sensory perception is a form of intelligence. It's a big form of intelligence. That is, those are our guiding posts,
Mm-hmm.
our signals, right? Just like, you're starting to eat something, you're like, "Ugh," or sometimes even when you look at something and, maybe I ought to not eat that or drink that. Like, right? I love Prosecco. Maybe only one glass instead of two, Daniela.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I do think that it remains to be seen, George, regarding the split. It's definitely the different consciousness groups are like different pods and they're sorting,
Mm.
and people are sort of still jumping quickly into this one. And I don't know, but they're jumping over, it still remains to be seen. But the dolphin consciousness overall is actually quite hopeful, because they do see that this divine discontent is largely at work to really start to steer the ship into a place of authentic living, into a place of living life in the flow. And as part of that, for those of us that are the forebringer of this information, to be willing to let it all go. Like I said, there was a part in my life where I was writing this chapter, Losing Your Mind, which had a lot to do with letting it all go. Like, what do you mean? It's something that I think people experience when they go through this divine discontent and discombobulation, this disorientation to,
Mm.
who am I in all of this? What's my part in it? And instead of being so busy of how you fit into the world, starting to find out how your own pieces are fitting together, and really allowing yourself to be guided by the way you're going to feel, and with whom you're going to be doing it with, where it does create these stronger states of resonance. And really paying attention to that, George. To what extent does this task resonate? Now, am I saying you're going to have to just no longer be needing to do tasks you really don't want to do? No, I'm not saying that completely. I'm saying it somewhat, even though that would be nice. But paying attention to what resonates, who resonates, how do you feel when you're with these people? Stopping to try to force people or opinions, or rather, we're talking political affiliations or religious affiliations, just feeling into your own state of being. And instead of, when you marry, you love and honor, respect your, spouse, turning that toward yourself. Because once you can find it within you, then you can start to extend it out. Pods, they're yet to be determined who is where, but the pod of the light and the forebringer, and those that are willing to walk that path, it's gained more and more momentum. And of course, there's still the dark side too.
What I can't help but think, what is the dark side? I don't want to give it any sort of momentum, but I think it would be unfair to not talk about it.
Yes. So the dark side, it's a good question. If everyone closes their eyes for a minute and asks themselves, what is the dark side? and just listen to your own answer, your own intuitive answer, whatever that is. What is the dark side? You know? So the dark side creates disintegration, confusion, and that starts, of course, through manipulation and programming. And so the dark side oftentimes really does have a love of power versus the power of love.
Mm.
So the love of power has the love of power does not have unity consciousness, right? Where if you have the power of love, you end up having a lot of power because you can reach the one that has the power of love through your own energy, not always by what you say, but the energy you hold. And it's almost like you open this little gateway for them to start coming over, because you're not pushing against them, you're not resisting them, you're leaving it open, you're not taking offense to everything. It's very much an energy thing. It reminds me, George, too. I was the youngest of 4 children, and I think all of us have been trained when we grew up into who we are. And having been the youngest of 4, I was always very much the mediator, the wise judge, the translator, you know? So I got very used to it at early ages with living with very conflicting opinions among the family members, you know? And so I often found myself in a position of listening and then repeating it to that person. And then they'd say, "That's not really what I meant." I'm like, "Well, what did you mean?" "Oh." Reminds me a little bit of the work from Marshall, what's his name?
McLuhan?
The founder of nonviolent communication. Forgot his first name. Just call him Mr. Marshall. So point being, though, it is the power of love that ultimately can create that transition, but not the love of power. The love of power is always going to try to do that. So, in the way I see it, without getting into details, that's a big part there. Your question, what is the dark? And of
Yeah.
course, there's much that goes through that bridge. We don't necessarily need to get all into, but to be aware that the dolphins are not talking about not to be aware of that. They're not saying, "Oh, guys, now put on the pink glasses," and it's not what they're talking about.
Right.
But to be aware, who are you rooting for? What team are you rooting for? You're rooting for the unity of humankind within diversity, right? Can you allow for the different opinions to exist? I personally don't care who votes for who within my friends. It's more a matter of how are we getting along? How are you treating me? How am I treating you? So what am I going to say now because you're this or that? You're out. So it's creating a different sense of allowance for people to show up as they are. And again, through that showing up, through the power of love. And there's a lot to be said about, again, what that continues to look like. Just like I was using the example of growing up as the youngest of 4 children, to translate those different opinions and to always keeping the greater good in mind.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about all the experiences that life has taught us, and that when you look back, it's like those were necessary. Some of the darkest spots in your life were like, this part you may not understand why this person had to die, but as you get older, you realize like that was a necessary part of your evolution and understanding your relationship to the world. So yeah, it's I know I try not to shy away from the dark because I think that you know we can be like flashlights and light up or illuminate some of those shadows, and then you're not afraid of them as much anymore. But it's always an important question I want to bring up. I got another question coming in here from our friend Lonnie. She says, your work guides people through generational healing and breaking free from ancestral chains. How do you see the act of healing the past as essential to the future? And do you believe there's an ancestral memory we're meant to reconnect with?
Well, that's a great question. Definitely in parts, ancestral memory. I think we all have that within
Mm-hmm.
moving through our veins. There's absolutely no question to that. I do think we are meant to connect with that individually as apropos for each person. Definitely, because there's actually where they keep on bringing me back to the book. There is a chapter in the book called Patterns No More. And he talks about the ancestral patterns, and not just those, but also the patterns that we continue in our day-to-day to live with, right? And so being able to shift those on a day-to-day basis, those patterns, those habits, right, are very important, because as we do, again, we start to step out of programming, right? And in my first book, there is a quote that I talk about. Most people are still creating their life from a past present state of awareness.
Mm.
I remember the editor telling me that's too difficult. People are not going to understand that. I'm like, well, that's what they're wanting me to write. Most of us create our lives from the past present state of awareness. So that ancestral healing, as you start to tap into it and heal it and allow it to come up as a messenger, well, hello, whoa, a little intense there, right? With everything that goes along with ancestral and trauma healing. It's intense. It's a very intense journey. But as you do connect with it, it then allows to move forward, to go into the present state of consciousness and awareness from which we can then heal. So to each their own part. Are we specifically supposed to, as a whole species? It's just a very individualized process, the trauma healing. But I do think trauma healing has come up more and more and more. Even the men that I work with, there's certain parts of trauma healing that lately I seem to work a lot with men in their 50s, that needs to come up. And when that comes up, suddenly things professionally clear up, in
Mm-hmm.
relationships clear up, with the parents clear up. But the beginning, sometimes they're not even aware that it had to do with part of ancestral healing, the family, and beyond. Back to the listener's question.
Yeah, it seems that like the message I get that I've been hearing, not only from what we've been talking about today, but seems to be on the surface, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, is that this idea that maybe the consciousness that's evolving is this beyond binary. It's not past or present. It's this idea of a true paradox where when you can begin to see both people are right. That's a excuse me. That's an interesting perspective. If you can sit down and be like, they're both right. What does that mean for
That's
me? It's like
it's
it's hard to hold on to, but the more you begin practicing it, it's really easy to begin having empathy or a
yes,
different perspective. Like, oh, they're both right. And it's
yes.
not right or wrong, past or present. It's just is.
Right. And that's exactly, you just nailed it. That's exactly what I'm and what they're talking about,
Right.
is that. And then when that's what brought me back to my memory of constantly
Yeah.
translating to everyone. And sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, can't you just see it? It's so, but they did not see it. So to allow, and the reason why I was able to translate it, because I didn't really take any sides. I just saw,
Yeah.
oh, okay, George, oh, Henry, oh, that's okay. So where were we going to find the bridge? Where are we going to find the bridge here? Because both are right. Because you
Yeah.
have your mindset and belief system, and so does Henry have his mindset and belief system, right? But where are we going to find each other? Where is that love of the power of love to find unity, understanding? Is that going to mean you're going to have the exact same opinion? Absolutely not. That's just a faulty illusion, you know. But they were just guiding me to this part here. Again, I guess it's still
Yeah.
encouraged to be. If I read a minute here.
Please do.
So this is about the courage to be, and they're talking about here in the now. Due to the state of the evolution of humanity, however, much of this no longer applies, and you are now asked to shed and relearn how to trust yourselves, those in kind, and your inner north once again, to lay out the nets just like fishermen do, and the true fishermen of humanity multiplying empowerment, awareness, and love unconditional for the sake of its power and not the love of power. For filtering and sorting, and similar to the webbing of a spider's orienting itself within the matrix of its own making, to pivot and navigate forward and recalibrate by reconnecting to your inner compass, leading direction, starting to comprehend the extent of your previous disconnection of body and self, others, and your natural environment, including its cohabitating creatures. This is important. This is an important stepping stone in this process of reckoning, particularly as you call back lost soul fragments that caused you to lose faith, hope, courage, and confidence in your journey, led by your soul eternal, yet in parts having been disconnected from its mothership. And on it goes.
The part about calling back really resonates with me. Calling back those things. Here we go. We got another question coming in this one is from Sky in Petaluma. She says, what daily practices from your performance triad can help people experience a more fluid state of being?
Oh, I love that. Let me go to my other
Yeah.
book here. So to activate the power of your physiology, again, I didn't know when I wrote this first book that the second book was completely connected to it. Because I'm starting to write this
Right.
book and I'm like, what are you guys talking about? This is more of a left brain book. Now you want me to do this? And then I'm realizing it all goes back to the innate power that lives within the sensory perceptiveness. So the first part here is I have a little, you can see it right there, perhaps. So it says the mind. So the practice would be as you're going through life situations, right? To shift, first of all, we all know the monkey mind. The monkey mind is going to do its thing. It's going to be there. It's going to do what it does until you start to take charge of it. And you start to drop into your wise mind instead. So once you're in the wise mind, you can start to shift your attention to what really matters to you, listener or listeners, right? So that's the mind. Now we come to the second part, which is the emotions. Stop suppressing and leverage your feelings as fuel. So the question is, how have I been, for example, suppressing my anger? What does my anger have to tell me? Oh, I'm never angry. What are you talking about, Daniela? I'm not, it's not spiritual to be angry. I don't get angry, right? Being a little facetious here. But
Right.
what does the feeling have to say? What does it, shifting to what matters? Okay, well, right now I'm really feeling angry, right? Well, if you start suppressing those feelings, maybe, and you start to list those feelings, what are those feelings that you are disconnecting from, that you are not wanting to embody or give validity to? So leveraging them as fuel. And then third is physiology. So that's where the body comes in, moving your body to adopt and change your state fast. So let me explain that. The body, as many of you know, it holds emotions. It holds programming. It is oftentimes why some of us end up getting a disease, but not necessarily. That's not always the case. But let's just stick with muscle tension or tightness, right? It's life building up on our body inside of our organs, right? So when we use movement, so body has its own memory. So when we start to use movement, I use it at my office with my clients. You use specific movements, or you can find your own movements where you just free yourself. So even if you feel that emotion and you start with your head down, with your hand on your chest, and you stand solidly grounded, right, with your feet, and you think of that emotion that you are holding that has been contracting you, and you just start to move up and out your arms, and you start to come back into center, and you allow that feeling to float out into the ethers, and you bring your arms back. That's where you can start to shift the energy. It's a very quick way to shift it. Oftentimes with particularly very cerebral clients that I have, I start to use a lot of movement practices, because that's the one way that they can shift. And then they go, "Oh wow, I can't believe I'm feeling so much better. I don't feel this heaviness." Right? We could have talked about it for half an hour and we'd have not done the same thing that we just accomplished in 3 minutes, right? So that is the practice of the activate the power of your physiology within the Vibrant Living Performance Triad. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. And of course, it's also individualized. This is just a generalized practice here. So that helps us to go from a contracted state that sits in the body, and then also within the mind, within the emotion, into more of an open flowing state. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, I do. I think it speaks to the idea of, so often we think of flow as being in the moment, but maybe there's not enough. I don't learn enough, or I haven't spoken to enough people who talk about the relationship between body mechanics and flow, right? Like there should be some exercises that help you get into that stage. And I guess when you start looking at athletes that, reach a certain threshold, they get into muscle memory, or they get into the zone, or whatever you want to call it. I guess that there's a lot of body mechanics connected to that as well, which
Yes.
brings us to another great question. We have another great question this one's coming in from Julie from Palm Desert over by you. For high
Okay.
performers who often feel pressured by constant goals, how do you help them reconnect with an underlying sense of dolphin-like play as a source of renewal?
Oh, I love that. Because that is such an apropos thing, really, with many people that I work with, especially a lot of being an entrepreneur myself, speaker, coach, author. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs also, and business owners, and they're often quite ambitious, right? So, one way of doing that really is to definitely adopt a meditation practice on a daily
Mm,
basis, particularly the morning, and to kind of realign to what resonates the most for you on that day. And then also, oftentimes, I have them take a look at the goals and breaking down those goals to which of those, let's just say 6 goals, is really most apropos at the time being. And the intention behind the goal. Is that how valid is that intention behind the goal? Do you just want to do it because, or is this a goal driven from the, because I coach my clients and teach my clients to live their life now, even their corporate life, driven from the seat of their soul. And that's very different. when you start to connect with, what are you talking about? The seat of my soul? Well, let me think about that one. Right? It's very different where they're starting to then dissect, well, yeah, no, this doesn't really relate to anything I really want to do. It doesn't, I liken it to a spaceship. You start to become the captain of your ship, which this first book talks about. You're the captain of your ship, but then you're here, you're in your cockpit, right? And you're having to like re-navigate. Well, this light is way too bright. Really dim that down because I'm not going to do this until like 5 years, but I'm so focused on it. But how about this? Well, the speed, or well, this priority really ought to be off because it's not even urgent. It's not even important. It's somewhat important. So to really prioritize that through the feeling again of the sensory perceptiveness. Are you living from the seat of your soul, or from the monkey mind, the driven monkey mind, trying to dictate what you're trying to do? So reconnecting back to your present state of consciousness is first order of business. Once you do that, Julie, then you can move forward into identifying what the actual goals are, because many of them then often they fall away, and the way you're doing them also falls away, and it pivots. It gets a different feeling. It gets a different energy. Yeah, great question.
Yeah, that is an awesome question. It's sometimes so difficult to not be distracted by that bright light or that beeping sound or whatever distraction is calling you to I need your awareness now. There's all these bells and whistles going off all the time, and if you're not really aware that that particular bell is a alarm for something that's not that important, like, do you think that same method, like, is there something else that can help people be more mindful that a lot of these things are just distractions?
Absolutely. So, these, at a very basic level, to basically to list all the activities that you do on a day-to-day basis, and finding out how much time do you actually spend with them, whether that is social media or phone calls or talking or calling people, asking for opinions, to really look at your day-to-day on a very basic level to see where are you spending your time. And are you pre-thinking your vision? What is your vision? Are you pulled by vision, or pushed? Are you pushed by pain? What's working you? So if your vision is not crystallized and crystal clear, right? Distractions are going to be all over. And then you cannot really fully be present with what is calling your attention now. And that's the multipreneur that may not be successful and is all over the place. So am I pulled by vision or pushed by pain? Once the vision becomes clear, it goes all back out into alignment. You can become aligned within your vision. Talking about alignment, that is why I ended up creating Compassionate Liberation for the High Performer Daily Alignment Cards. And in the 7 habits that are in the book, there are 8 cards per habit in here, which then help the high performer. For example, last week's card was Patience and Transformation of the Ego. Right? This is about alignment. These are alignment cards, where it says on here, the true needs and desires of the parts of me that are unacknowledged and sabotaging my efforts are, and I will meet them in the following ways. So this is always about going back into alignment when we are scattered with our attention, right? And we're focused on other people's. We've all heard the saying, "Not my monkeys, not my circus."
Yeah.
Right? So alignment is a big part of that distraction component. And presence, of course, practicing mindfulness meditation and presence. I'm a sensitive mindfulness teacher. So it really helps to bring and hone that attention back into your own reconnection and the power of the now, from which you can then, from a much calmer place, redirect your energy. And the distractions will become less and less. But it is a practice. It's a practice.
It's interesting to feel like I've felt both of those. And I know many people who have felt the push of desperation versus the pull of clarification or inspiration on some level. And it is interesting how when you pull the string, it gets tight, it's in alignment. But if you push that string, it kind of is messy. You know what I mean? It's very interesting to think about these two forces between push and pull and alignment. Like, that's a beautiful way to put
Yes.
it. I'll have to take some time to think about that on some level. It almost feels that, the great attractor or that which pulls you is calling to you. When you feel called to something, the barriers just seem to be something you can jump over or bust through or not worry about on some level. It's a really beautiful way to put it. Thanks for putting it out there.
Oh,
Do those cards come with the book?
yes. So, I did the book, and that has the 7 habits. And this really is about rewrite your high performer pain stories, recreate healthy boundaries between work and life, reduce anxiety, depression, exhaustion, realign with your values, what we were just talking about, and create
Right.
congruence. Create congruence is a big one. Return your clarity, focus, and optimism. Reclaim a sense of self direction and flow. Again, and you just said it beautifully too. You start to, you just go away from that. You start to then be drawn. You're called to do it. Now it's a call.
Yeah.
It's not like we have to do it, and then everything starts to contract. And then it also helps to repair your challenge relationships, because as you start to really come into alignment, into congruence within your own self, right? So anyway, once I did that, then I created a workbook, because I realized my clients really needed to have a workbook where they can fill in, where it's broken down, and then from the workbook, I realized, no, I want them to have cards, so they can pull a daily card or a weekly card, or they can just work with habit one, and there's 8 cards, and you can put it right by your desk or by your computer, and you can work with that card as an alignment practice. So then I decided, well, we need the planner. So it's like, once I have to be real careful when I start something, because we'll take it to the Instagram. But the planner is very helpful, because the planner is also based on the 7 habits, and each month there's questions. Well, how did I improve my workflow incorporating presence, for example? Or how did my work or life relationships improve by incorporating presence practice? It makes it very practical, because the work for me is about not high lofty, but let's bring this into practical daily integration. That's really where the excitement is, when I see a client come back and say, oh my gosh, Daniela, I had no idea this was going to be so practical, and it really helped me to write this proposal, so
I love it. It's beautiful. I love the method of being present and finding ways to do it. And like we spoke earlier, it's real easy. It's slippery. It's like Martin Luther King's "I've been to the mountain" speech. Like, I've been to the mountaintop, but then you come back down, you got to do all this work. But it's important to keep that vision. It's important to keep that idea of presence around you so that you can get it coming up. Daniela, we went through an hour like it was 5 minutes. I feel like we just blew through our conversation right over here. It's so much fun. And I hope that
what?
everybody, I hope everybody within the sound of my voice will go down to the show notes and check out not only the new book, but the other book as well, and reach out to you specifically if they want to talk to you or if they have something they're working on. I think that you would be a fantastic person for them to reach out to. But before we land the plane, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can find you, what you got coming up, and and what you're excited about.
Sure. Well, I'm just excited about continuing to share the message, and the teachings, and to really help folks realize that this is palpable information. This can be integrated
Yeah.
into your day to day. And it's not about perfection, it's about progress. And it's about willingness to be willing to, these small steps add up at the end of the month, you know? So be easy and gentle with yourselves. You can find me on vibrantlivingnow.org. It's vibrantlivingnow.org. On it, you can see speaking pages. You can see my new retreat pages, which is to the wonderful Dolphin Harmony Meditation and Inner Peace Retreat in Riverside. And there are 2 retreats coming up. One of them is going to be for the new year. New year, new vision. Imagine that, right? And then there's also going to be a signature retreat coming up in the spring. And then there is my speaking website. I'm a keynote speaker, and that you can find under Daniela, Danie, 1 L and an A, Bumann, BUMANN.org. The other one is .com. The other one is .org. You can find me on social media. I also have a Dolphin Harmony meditation group, a private group on Facebook that I just recently created, and it's by request, because I'm really looking for people that fit into that energy and that have similar intentions. So you can find that on Facebook, and I'm also on Instagram, LinkedIn, any place basically. Just type in my name, and it's a little scary where I will pop up.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. To everybody who was part of the show and is listening, whether you're listening today live or tomorrow or 5 years from now, I hope we're so excited you're here, and I hope that you're becoming the best version of yourself. And that's all we got for today, ladies and gentlemen. Danielle, hang on briefly afterwards, but to everybody else, I hope you have a beautiful day. Aloha.
Aloha.